I went home and I just couldn't stop thinking about her.
When you're in country and you're sitting still and idle, that's a bad sign.
She no longer had a heartbeat. She wasn't breathing. That was the first one on the chest. I started compressions first.
Need activists. We need people that are going to hold companies, government, hold these people accountable.
Welcome to the Heroes Debrief, where we are providing a platform for our veterans and first responders to end up telling their stories. I'm your host, Jordan White, United States Navy veteran, current working paramedic, and founder of Hero Services. We are welcoming John Riley to sit down with us and tell us a bit about his story. He is 7 years Army veteran with a deployment during Desert Storm and retired after 20 years in law enforcement. Please be aware some of this content is not suited for immature audiences, so use your discretion as you're viewing the podcast. So, John, why don't you go ahead and just start us off about introducing yourself, giving us a little bit of backstory before you wound up enlisting in the Army.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come here and share and speak with you all. Joined the Army in 1989. I was actually in my early 20s, right after high school. I just kind of bummed around a little bit. Then it occurred to me I better start doing something with my life. So I joined the Army, went infantry. Had my original game plan was to play guns for a while, do infantry, and then re-enlist and get a quote-unquote real job. It didn't actually work out that way, but I think I turned out okay. So joined the Army in 1989, and in July, early August of 90, my unit, I was with the 24th Infantry Division, stationed at the time at Fort Stewart, Georgia. We were doing some desert warfare exercises at Fort Irwin, California, NTC, National Training Center. And the 24th Infantry Division was part of the Rapid Deployment Force, 18th Airborne Corps of the United States Army, and all our vehicles were in desert camouflage schemes. So it was that tan and light brown and all that. So we were out there at NTC, had just got done training, and I was on my way back to Fort Stewart. We went on leave, was hanging out with a buddy of mine in El Paso, Texas. And I remember we were at the mall and walking by one of the big, storefronts, and they had a whole bunch of TVs, and CNN was on. When back in the day, when CNN was a legitimate news agency, and they were reporting that Iraq had invaded Kuwait. And I remember my buddy and I joking and laughing that, crap hitting the fan over there in the Middle East, and that's our area of operations. Wouldn't it be funny if we get activated and alerted and deployed? So sure enough, a few days later, I've left him. I'm on my way to visit my family in Florida, and I get a phone call, report back to Fort Stewart. We're on alert. And sure enough, a few weeks later of 24 hours of nonstop busting our butt, loading up vehicles and equipment onto the trains to take it to the port of Savannah to load the ships and take it over there. Next thing you know, I was in country on September 1st, 1990. And that started there. I was there in Desert Shield, Desert Storm until March of 91. Came home mid-March of 91. So I was over there for about 6 months. So the original intent with the 24th Infantry Division was after the 82nd deployed first, they were setting up blocking positions just to make sure the Iraqis didn't continue south and take over all the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, because that would have been bad. Iraq had just concluded a 10-year war with Iran, and so Saddam Hussein at the time just needed to kind of replenish his coffers. still wanted to flex his muscles and be the strong man in the Middle East area, over in that area of the world. So he decided he was going to take Kuwait. And so again, the big fear was that he would continue his drive south. Well, and I did read later that he was very, very surprised at the U.S. response and the world's response. Once the 82nd deployed and they set up their blocking positions, again, the 24th Infantry Division was the heavy armored element of the Rapid Deployment Force. We deployed and set up a reinforced defensive lines behind the 82nd. And then we stayed there. Say I was in country in September, and so it wasn't until about December that I noticed that a lot of our training, a lot of the stuff that we were doing and talking about took on an offensive role. And about that time, I would say late December, we moved the entire 24th Infantry Division out west in the middle of the desert. And that's when we started setting up our attacking positions. Off on our left flank was the 82nd Airborne. They were attached with the French Foreign Legion. And then off to our right was the 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment out of Fort Bliss. And then east of them was the coalition forces, the Marines and the Kuwaitis and so on. Once D-Day, G-Day began on the February 24th, 91, we, the 24th Infantry Division, were expected to actually cross the line of departure, I think on the 26th. But the coalition forces are having such success, and if you may recall, the Iraqis are surrendering in droves. But that was because we had spent almost 30 days of continual bombardment, aerial bombardment. I remember listening and hearing the B-52s overhead and so on, and we just pounded them. So when the ground war began, they were more than happy to surrender. And they were surrendering in droves. And so I think on the 25th, 24 hours early, and a day after the ground war actually began, we got word that we were going to head and move forward. And then for us, with the 24th Infantry Division, if anyone looks at the map, we were on the far left. We made this large flanking Hail Mary maneuver through the desert up and set up blocking positions on Highway 8, which was the main MSR, the main supply route between Baghdad and Kuwait. Anyone moving back and forth between Kuwait and Baghdad was going to have to use this, I think it was like a 6 or 8 lane highway. So we moved up there with engagements along the way. So we were making this move, this left flank move with engagements along the way till we set up blocking positions along Highway 8. And once we consolidated there, refueled, we just kind of pivoted and started moving east and started wrapping things up. I remember we were warming up our engine and getting ready to continue the assault east, and we were getting ready to assault into Basra when the word came down that we were having a ceasefire, that the ceasefire was on. And I remember all of us kind of like, what do you mean? Because there was such a sense of we had this momentum going, and then all of a sudden we had this ceasefire, and there was almost an emotional sense of like what? We're just literally getting warmed up, and so they called it ceasefire. But in between the ceasefire and me coming home, there were moments of little sporadic firefights here and there, and I think one of the last big firefights, and probably the largest of the post-ceasefire firefights was. I think it was March 2nd of 91.
Before we get into that, so when you started this flanking maneuver, up until the time frame of the ceasefire, like how much time was that?
About 2 days.
Okay,
Yeah,
so you wound up running through that quickly then, huh?
We it was literally 48 hours of like almost nonstop, no sleep, no consistent sleep. We were taking naps. I was a driver of a Bradley fighting vehicle, so we would take cat naps. And I've learned, and I can still do it today, with a quiet moment, or if I have even 50 minutes, I can make myself fall asleep. Not a deep, deep sleep, but I can definitely, come down. But we were catching catnaps where we could. We would refuel and just keep driving forward. We would hit defensive positions. I know we had a big fight with an Iraqi commando unit. Once we shot them to pieces, we kept on going, and we left any survivors and so on to be dealt with by the supply trains coming up behind us, the engineers, the medics. headquarters units and mechanics elements coming up behind us would take care of all of the prisoners and clothe them and tend to their needs and all that.
And
The fighting elements, we didn't pause. We just kept rolling forward.
And that's not typical.
It really depends. It was typical for that type of doctrine and that type of fighting that we were doing, that blitzkrieg type of offensive maneuver, where we were not going to pause for anybody. We had certain objectives we had to meet, which is why, because I was so familiar with that, when in 2003, when the U.S. invaded Iraq again, there were just some things that they did in the ground phase that I just thought I just thought was very, very different. And in fact, I'm of the opinion that because of the way some of the things were executed at that time, it kind of set some of our supply trains to be ambushed and all that. But again, those decisions and all that were done with someone much higher pay grade than me. But we ended up just nonstop shooting and moving right up until the time of the ceasefire, and then one big fight March 2nd, and then that was it. And then a few days later, I was airlifted out a Jalibah airfield, one of the captured airfields that we had overrun. About 60 of us loaded up a C-130, and they flew us back to Saudi Arabia to get washed up, get some fresh uniforms, and head back stateside. And I remember the ramp coming down on the C-130, and we kind of tumbled out the back, and I remember looking up and seeing all these rear echelon people in fresh uniforms, riding bicycles, riding air-conditioned buses and taxis. The environment in the rear was very, very, very different from those of us combat elements on the front. And I turned around and looked at us, and we were dirty and disheveled, and there was just an incredible, immense sense of pride that washed over me. Just love for my fellow infantry grunts, and just a pride, looking at the American flag on our shoulders, and we'd done a good job. We went over there to take care of business, and we did. Although that sentiment kind of got questioned per se in 2003, a little over 10 years after Desert Storm was executed, we invade Iraq again, and I remember seeing on the cover of like Time magazine, newspaper, one of the papers articles out there, but it had the faces of all the U.S. casualties at that time, and I was noting their ages, 20, 21, 22, 19, and it hit me like a ton of bricks that these kids were only 10 years old when I was over there, and there was such a sense of having not taken care of it in the first place, that now these kids were laying down their lives for a situation that potentially could have been dealt with in 91. But again, someone in a much higher pay grade made those decisions.
We want to take a moment to thank our principal sponsors. These companies have supported Hero Services from a more general perspective rather than sponsoring a singular event. Window World, Paul Davis, and Bathworks have all committed to supporting Hero Services with their events as well as our various programs that we offer. Not only do these companies support Hero Services, but they have various other charitable donations as well. Please take the time to wind up looking into these companies in case you need any of your home renovation needs. Another thing that's came up quite often in the past few years is like there's active duty military that was in country in Iraq and Afghanistan that weren't even born during September 11.
Yeah.
With because that war was so long that it's just there's actually a large percentage of individuals that weren't born during September 11 that were fighting the post 9/11 wars.
Yeah.
And again, I think for the United States, that's a little bit shocking, but for other cultures and other countries and stuff like that, I was listening to a different podcast of talking about like most wars over in other countries are 30 plus years, 20, 30 plus years, ever ongoing. And that's just kind of a way of life for them. So it's an interesting dynamic.
I think one of the things that disappoints me is it seems to be a lack of forceful, determined response to aggression against U.S. Elements, U.S. forces, U.S. interests. In 1980s, when the suicide bomber blew up the Marine barracks in 1983, the U.S. immediately just pulled out. Everything that the United States has done, there's a phenomenon called precedence, and bad people can look at how the U.S. has responded to certain acts of aggression and all that, and have a fairly good, accurate determination and guess on how the U.S. is going to respond, which is why Saddam Hussein admitted, from stuff I read later, that he was very surprised at how the U.S. responded, because he expected us to do nothing. Just do a couple embargoes and call it good. Rant and rave on TV, but not actually do anything about it. Again, in the 80s, suicide bomber in the Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, boom, U.S. forces pulled out. We saw what happened with Vietnam. So instead of decisively engaging and letting people know, you don't mess with us, you don't mess with our forces, blah, 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 because otherwise you have what's called a mission creep and things just steadily get worse. And I want to make sure, as we see this situation in the Middle East continue right now going into several months, and now U.S. forces are getting more and more involved, I see what I call a mission creep. First, we're taking out drones against U.S. ships by blowing up their ammo dumps. Okay, how about let's start taking out their radar, their launch sites, and their ammo dumps. Let's decisively engage and let them know we're not going to put up with it. Blowing up their ammo dumps is only very temporarily going to delay them. Their launches are still set. The personnel trained to fire those munitions are still in place. All they got to do is wait for more ammunition. What did we do? Nothing. And so I'm very concerned about how this current situation is being executed. Do I want to go to war? Absolutely not. But you pick a fight with us, we're going to end it. Or at least we should. That's my very humble opinion.
And I think it is better to be, like you said, some decisive action. Go in there and get it done.
Get it done.
Get it done, and don't be taking 20 years to do it.
No, exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. This situation, the Israelis, I think, are doing it right in that after years of trying to play nice and placating and so on, this thing after October 7th was just, that was the last straw, and they are now going to go and take care of the issue, and they're going to dig out and root out all their senior leaders and just deal with it. They're going to deal with it forcefully.
I'm hoping that they can do it on their own.
Oh, see, and that's exactly right. Exactly right. But in the meantime, now that we see that U.S. forces, especially naval elements in the Red Sea and so on, beginning to engage and do things and be fired upon, well, right now we need to decisively deal with that. And again, there's no easy answer, but now that we're here, let's just deal with it.
Yeah.
Let's just deal with it.
Yep.
We are the most powerful, most lethal fighting force on this planet. I know because as an infantry soldier, and this was back in the 90s, I saw how we trained, the tools that we use. And even today, NTC is not like it was when I was there. We have full mock-up villages and towns and stuff like that. The training is very realistic. It's very dynamic. And so our people going over there are so much more trained and so on. And there's an adage out there: the deadliest weapon on any battlefield is a motivated soldier with a rifle. We have that. And if you mess with us, this is what we're going to unleash on you. But this little thing here and there, we're going to blow up your ammo dump. Okay, well, you really didn't do anything to let them know that you're deadly serious. Because they can always replenish their ammo, but it's going to be very difficult to replenish trained personnel and equipment designed to launch those munitions. Again, my very humble opinion.
It's an interesting contrast from the era that you came from to like the Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
To just see the different dynamics of kind of how that was treated and how it was progressed.
I absolutely am against U.S. forces being used as a police force.
Yeah.
Once they overthrew the Taliban, we're out.
Yeah.
We're out.
Yeah.
But once we get sucked into now we're trying to police a country of a different culture and all that, we end up with what's happened. I mean, we can go back through history and see every time the United States was unfortunately dragged into a policing type, create a community type thing, it's ended very badly. And so once I saw that trend, I was like, yeah, I don't see how this is going to end well. We had already annihilated the Taliban, but who has the last laugh now, 20 years later? The Taliban.
Yeah.
And countless lives lost and maimed. That's a whole different rabbit hole, though.
Yeah.
And,
It is. You mentioned you mentioned one of the last battles that was post ceasefire, and we talked about that in the past, but we kind of skipped over it this time around. Let's, if you don't mind, talk about a little bit about that and kind of explain how that occurred and some of the nuances, because you're in a post ceasefire environment, but you're still having a battle.
Yeah. Every now and then, you're going to run into pockets of diehards who absolutely don't want to surrender, who are willing to lay down their lives. And so we ran into a little bit of that from time to time. Most of it, though, was indirect fire, mortars, cannon, artillery fire, indirect fire. This particular engagement was a very large remnant of a Iraqi Republican Guard armored division that was going to try to make a run for it and bust through our lines and make it back towards Baghdad. What happened was they encountered some of our scouts, our forward scouts, fired on them. No one got hurt, but obviously we weren't going to put up with that, and so that alerted us that apparently a major element was rolling down the highway. I do not think that what was left of this Republican Guard unit realized the extent of our defensive positions, or they did. I don't think they realized that we had completely enveloped them, because I do remember reading years later accounts of people talking to Iraqi prisoners, and they were absolutely dumbfounded that we had crossed as much desert as we had and ended up where we were. So I wonder if the Iraqi Republican Guard commanders knew what they were getting into. Either that or they didn't care. They wanted to make a bust out and head home. So it became a direct firefight, tanks on tanks and so on, anti-tank missiles, and so it was very direct. Unfortunately, because of our defensive positions, our firepower, our technology, they were just annihilated and just absolutely wiped out. And it was, it was very unfortunate. The first firefights and all that that battle began before the sun came up, and by the time it was over, towards late afternoon, I mean, this entire Republican Guard armored division was just absolutely annihilated. Thousands of armored vehicles and a lot of personnel just blasted away. I remember rolling through the Rumaila oil fields. This whole battle, I think, is called the Battle of the Rumaila oil fields. We were rolling through infrastructure, the oil fields, pipes, little houses, huts, and stuff for equipment. And I remember coming upon some M1 tanks that were lined up, and we were passing them. And I remember seeing someone had tied an American flag to one of their antennas. And I remember there was such an emotion that came over me just seeing our flag in that moment, in that place, at that time. And I remember taking a picture of it. And it's a kind of a blurry picture, but it just means, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to explain that moment and those emotions and all that to someone who wasn't there per se, who can just relate to just that, just seeing our flag. Yeah.
So. That flag was tied up
Yeah, it
by
was-
a
yeah.
native.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
U.S. Yeah. Yeah, it was one of the armored crewmen climbed up and just tied the American flag on it. And there was an amazing sense of patriotism and national pride at that time. A lot of people don't realize, you go back and look at some of the old newsreels and stuff like that, people were tying yellow ribbons around trees, and there was such a sense of coming together. And I remember when we got back to Fort Stewart, there were Vietnam vets lined up, and it still hits me. They're thanking us for our time in service and stuff like that, and they were honoring us and rendering honors and respect to us that they should have got when they came home, instead of being spit on and so on. And so a lot of us ended up with tears in our own eyes, and I'm like, man, no, thank you. Thank you for the stuff that you did and had to put up with, and I'm sorry you had to. A whole very, very different time there, unfortunately, compared to what we see now. There's absolutely no sense of national pride or anything like that. It's unfortunate.
Yeah. So, anything more in regards to your military enlistment?
Yeah, I was actually trying to stay in, but I had become a sergeant promotable, and it kind of locked me into the infantry, and I did not want to stay in the military doing a job that I had basically gotten bored with. Because I had been around and had enough life experience to have met people who were just grumpy and frustrated and angry that they were in this job that they didn't want to be in. And I didn't want to be one of those old farts. And I'm like, you know what? I can't do this to myself. As much as I love the Army, I just didn't want to play infantry anymore. And so I took my ball and went home, if you will, and actually ended up becoming a police officer here in Grand Rapids in '96, and then retired in 2015, just under 20 years or so. Yeah.
So, when you first got out and you were looking at going law enforcement, you weren't in Michigan at that time.
No, I was at Fort Hood, Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my brother was a police officer at the time. He's since retired from the FBI, but he gave me a ride along. And at that time, the show Cops had just come out. And so I had started catching some episodes of Cops. And I knew that I didn't want to be locked in an office. I just needed a variety of life. I just wanted more than just 9 to 5. You certainly get it in the first responder world. And so it began to appeal to me, maybe being law enforcement. And after my brother's ride along, and then in those days before the internet, if you wanted to know what departments around the country were hiring, you had to send out for a little pamphlet. You'd take about a week to get there, and then when you got it, you look through the list to see where you might be interested in applying to, and send them a letter or whatever. And by then, of course, with snail mail, as we call it now, there's no guarantee the job opening was still there. At that time, I knew that I wanted to get a job in one of the northern states, and even to this day, I think the rule of thumb is southern states don't pay their police officers diddly squat. And so I knew that I wanted to go north. And so I applied to St. Louis, Missouri, St. Louis County, Missouri, and then Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Why would the police departments north get paid more?
Economy, culture, I don't know. But when you look up some of these incidences that happen in the news over the last 20, 30, 40 years, you'll see that involved off-duty police officers moonlighting as security or stuff like that. It's all southern states.
You think they'd get paid more with Florida man?
No. No. I could have got a job like that because I'm fluent in Spanish. I could have got a job in Texas like that, hands down, automatically. I literally would have been a shoo-in. But I knew, just as an example, back then, the Grand Rapids starting pay was like maybe 30 grand. Starting pay in the South was like 15. I mean, it was just a night and day difference. And I think to this day, I think I'm still correct. Anyone watching this can probably look it up real quick, but I think generally, for some reason, your southern states, it's just very different. The pay scale and all that's very different. So that's why I knew I was going to come north, and here I am. Yeah, yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
I can't fathom a reason why that would be the case.
Yeah. economy, just something like, yeah.
So you wound up getting your packet or whatever.
Yeah.
And then you were you were deciding between what departments?
St. Louis County, Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri, and Grand Rapids, and this is the first time I felt the good Lord working in my life, because every time I needed time off in the Army, and again I was in Fort Hood, Texas at the time. Every time I needed time off to come up here to Grand Rapids to go through the hiring process, everything fell in place. Automatically, very quickly signed off by the platoon sergeant, first sergeant, and everybody else. But every time I needed time to go to St. Louis, Missouri, there were hoops I had to jump through. And yes, I got signed off on, but there was just such a sense of having to jump through hoops. And I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I'm being led to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And sure enough, when St. Louis, Missouri, they offered me a job first, I just held out. I was firmly convinced I was being led to Grand Rapids. And then sure enough, Grand Rapids offered me the job. And here I am.
So seeing how we're in this part of your story, let's talk about being discharged from the military and like that transition into finding a new life, finding a new career and stuff like that, because that tends to be a pretty hot topic in regards to veterans trying to adjust.
It is, and I think that one of the number one problems is they wait too long. And I saw this when I was in, and I knew in January of '96, when my final effort to change jobs, I had been approved to go into counterintelligence. Infantry branch would not release me. I tried to be a drill sergeant, X-ray. I tried all this stuff, and the problem was it was either because I was an E5 or it was because I was not an E6. I mean, it was like I was stuck in this gray area. And in my final effort was I got approved to go into EOD, bomb disposal. And infantry branch would not release me. And I got that word in January of '96. And my ETS date, my end of service date, was June of '96. So when I got the final letdown, the final refusal in January, I knew I was getting out. So I began to psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually begin to make that disconnect from the Army. And so I began to apply and look for jobs and tried to time it right. And I did, because my end of service date was June, and I started the police academy in August of '96. So I mean, it was about as smooth a transition as I could. And in that meantime, between January and June, I did my Army things. I went on field deployments. I did all that I had to do. And again, I just felt like when I needed time off to come up to Grand Rapids, and I was taking that 24-hour drive, stopping halfway in Missouri, and then continuing. It was always, almost a full week that I would need from the Army. And it was no problem. And it was no problem to go to St. Louis, but there was just such a sense of jumping through hoops. But again, it's so critical. When you make that decision that you're going to leave the military, make that decision as early as possible, and then start looking for a job so that when you get out, because I'd seen it happen to young people back in my day, they would get out of the Army and then end up not getting a job for maybe months. Well, bills are stacking up, it's like, and that just adds to the stress. And so I encourage people, look, if you have an inkling that you're going to get out of the military, make that decision as early as possible.
I think that's all really good points. I hear a lot of veterans say, like, I enlisted, spent 3, 4, maybe 5 years on your enlistment or whatever, and like it was basically that they just took a pause on everything and like a pause on life and went and played military, and they didn't have to worry about anything until the very end of their enlistment. And you're not going to be able to wind up coming back home and like picking up where you left off when you first shipped out, like nothing has changed. So I know when I wound up getting out, I discharged after 5 years, and then I spent a couple more years as a civilian, but not back home in Michigan. When I got back home to Michigan, like the town I grew up in didn't look the same.
Yeah.
all the people that I knew outside of my family were gone. Like, even my family members look different because they're 5, 7 years older, some of them that I hadn't seen, and like, others that I have seen, but I've only seen on a yearly basis or whatever. Like, everything is completely different. So I guess coming from my perspective is in agreement with you, understand that you need to wind up planning potentially a year in advance, and then also fully expect that you are starting over yet again.
Absolutely.
You started over when you enlisted, and you're going to start over again when you get discharged, and prepare for that, because you're going to have to wind up basically building an entire new life yet again. And I think I think part of the problem is for the guys that enlist for 2 to 3 years at a time. Like, essentially, they're preparing for discharge right about the time that they're getting into the swing of being in the military. So
Totally.
it's interesting to wind up kind of dealing with that, and I don't know how to make that process better. I think it would be like the TAPS class and stuff like that coming from the military would be much further in advance rather than last 6 weeks prior to you being discharged. They need to start some sort of process like a full 6 to 12 months ahead of time. But
Well, and that's why I encourage military personnel to take the initiative to start taking care of yourself. Because once you get out, you're not going to have the Army and the Air Force, Navy, Marines to fall back on. They're not going to quote unquote hold your hand anymore. You're on your own.
And I mean, to be fair, here's another thing is, to be fair, like, if I would have went in 22, 25 years old and had a little bit more life experience, I probably would have been a much better sailor, probably made better decisions and stuff like that. But going in at 18 years old, barely 18 years old, and being, starting out my early 20s in the military, I was not making good decisions.
Right.
Like, I was not planning for the future. I was, trying to figure out where the best happy hour was.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah. But
I think that's what I had going for me. When I joined the military, I was I think I was 24. 23, 24, and everyone else that I was in boot camp with and all that were, 17, 18, 19 years old. And I already had a little bit more life experience than they did. And so that just carried on through my life and career.
I think I graduated for 2 months before I shipped out.
Yeah.
And it was just, and then it went from boot camp to Florida to Texas.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'm coming from Michigan. I'm in warm climate. There's beaches everywhere. I got a cabbie that's like helping me out with, me only being 18 years old. Like,
it's a culture shock.
Yeah, it was
Actually,
kind of a wild
the military actually started wording it almost the way you did just now, is getting people to understand you are starting over. You need to start planning this emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. It's not going to be a smooth transition where your friends are still there. It's going to be a whole new world.
No. And I mean, there's a lot of similarities to the first response world, but like, you can attest to this, it is not the same.
No.
There are certain, it's, what is it, a Venn diagram with the two circles that overlap? Yeah. So, I mean, there's things that overlap, but they're two entirely different lifestyles.
So,
and, a lot of, I think a lot of people that are considering getting into the military or whatever need to understand that there is not, I don't know of very many occupations, if any, that can be similar to having a lifestyle in the military.
Right.
So the only thing that I consider is maybe like contract work on an oil platform. You'd be deployed like that, but I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, so anything you want to talk about prior to getting in?
No, once I made that decision to start working towards that, the transition was actually very smooth for me. So end of service date, June. I burned up whatever vacation and extra time I had in the military, went right into the police academy end of July of '96, and here I am.
So what was the police academy like for you?
In my police academy class, there were 24 of us who had just got out of the military, and so there was
24?
about 24 of us. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Who had just got out of the Army from all different branches, Army, Air Force, mainly Air Force and Army that I can remember. And we immediately had our own little unique bond because we had just come from a similar, military background. Our discipline was different. Even the training cadre at the police academy noticed this. I mean, we very much stood out as an academy class just because of our background.
How big was your class in total?
Maybe 28. So the vast majority of us the vast majority of us were my department and all military veterans.
So, I mean, I guess I don't really know, but I feel like having a class of approximately 30 in today's context, that's a big class, isn't it?
Oh yeah. That's. I don't know if it's any larger. That's a good size, full, manageable. You don't want to have a class that's so large that you need that many more instructors for that one-on-one type of relationship and instruction and all that. So I think that's roughly about average, I would say. I believe that's still the same today. I mean, I could be wrong, but at the time that I went in, roughly 30 is a good solid class. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No.
So, well, I guess I've always assumed police academy is like a smoother version of boot camp.
Yeah. From what I understand, the state police academy is a lot more militaristic per se. But the civilian police academy, it's more academic.
Okay.
They definitely put an emphasis on being physically fit. So you do get up. There is PT. There is some, but the vast majority of it is going to be academic because now you've got to get up to speed with the laws, the history of some of the laws, and then now procedures, handcuffing procedures. There's a lot that goes on, and it's all the vast majority of it is brain work.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to make sure you've got good study habits. Taking these tests and so on, and just retaining it, learning that stuff. And of course, just like anything in the world, once you get past school, once you get past the academy, there's a lot of things that you could specialize in or whatever that you never see again. Like going through the police academy, we may have learned and picked up a couple things that are DNR related, Department of Natural Health, but Department of Natural Resources. But once I got to the city, that stuff went out the windows and wasn't anything I need to deal with. Consequences for not having a fishing permit. Okay, a ticket. But I don't know what the costs are.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things that once you get to your department, to where you're assigned, yes, there are things that are going to be very, very relevant from the police academy, but a lot of it also, just like a lot of book knowledge, goes out the window. But while you're there, my gosh, you better be on top of it all.
Did you feel really prepared leaving the academy and coming into the street?
Yes and no. Nobody is prepared for the reality of the streets and what a person will do to their fellow man, even family members. When you see the depravity and viciousness that things that people will say and do, it's going to be a shocker.
Mm-hmm.
And you've really got to quickly come to grips with that. Otherwise, it will chew you up and eat you and spit you out. I did have 2 or 3 people who graduated the police academy with me, and within a month of being at our department decided, the reality of this is not what I signed up for.
We want to thank you for joining us as we sat down and talked with John Riley. There is more conversation to come. We are going to end part 1 here, and we will be picking up on part 2 next week, Wednesday.